So our goal today is to kind of go through what a cell is, the different types of cells, and then some of the organelles that help cells to function. So before we get into the actual cell, I want to review a concept with you that we talked about in physics, and that's the idea of an open system. I don't know how many of you guys remember open and closed systems and isolated systems from physics, but an open system is any system that exchanges both matter and energy with the environment. Okay, and we're talking about exchanging, so input and output. So a cell is considered to be an open system because the cell takes in energy, usually in the form of chemical energy, or if you're a plant, you take in energy as solar energy. Okay, and you take in matter. So again, oxygen has to come in a lot of cases, water, nutrients, food, and then waste products have to be given off. And then usually energy is also given off by the cell as well. And that energy can be in the form of heat, or it can be in the form of something called ATP. Okay, or if you're a plant, you produce sugars which have chemical energy and you release those. So both matter and energy are exchanged, and by exchange I mean input and output with the environment. Now the reason the cell does this, exchanges matter and energy with the environment, is to maintain equilibrium. Another word that you'll see a lot of times in biology is homeostasis. Okay, homeostasis, equilibrium, balance. All of these words mean the same thing. And in order for a cell to maintain that nice balance that's essential for life, the cell has to take in matter, get rid of waste, take in energy, get rid of energy. Okay, and if input equals output, then you have balance. Okay, now the cell has to work to maintain this balance. The cell has to bring in nutrients, bring in energy, do metabolism, which is a bunch of chemical reactions within the cell, and then again, get rid of waste products. Now, there are two main kinds of cells on planet Earth that we know of. The first type of cell is called a prokaryotic cell. Now, prokaryotic cells are the most ancient forms of life. These include bacteria and a special kingdom of life called archaeobacteria. Now, these are ancient organisms. Scientists think that these are some of the first organisms that ever appeared on Earth. Archaeobacteria can be found in places that you'd never think life would be found, in like these volcanic lakes, at the bottom of oceans where there's no light. Okay, and the thing that prokaryotes all have in common is they do not have organelles. Now, we're going to talk about what an organelle is here in a second. I think, again, we talked about this. Most students that I come across anyway, the one organelle that they all know about is the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, right? There's a bunch more organelles we'll talk about today, but none of those organelles appear in prokaryotic cells. Okay, and that includes a nucleus. So one of the key defining characteristics of prokaryotes is they do not have a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles. Okay, so again, bacteria. So bacteria that might cause you to get like strep throat, or acne is caused by bacteria, or the bacteria that lives in your large intestine and is actually beneficial bacteria for you. The bacteria that we find in the soil. These are prokaryotes, okay? Very early life forms. The second type of cell, and this is the cell that you guys are probably more familiar with, are called eukaryotes. Now, eukaryotes have a nucleus. And eukaryotes have organelles. If you did a cell project in junior high school, it would have been to build a eukaryote. We're going to concentrate our time in this section on looking at eukaryotes because we're very familiar with them. And they actually, eukaryotic cells are what makes up all plant and animal cells. And again, we're going to look at the similarities and differences between plant and animal cells, but all plant and animal cells are eukaryotic, meaning they have a nucleus and they have organelles which are bound by a membrane. Okay, so animal cells they come in a variety of shapes and sizes. They do not have a cell wall. Okay, do not have a cell wall and do not have chloroplasts. Now, plant cells tend to be more cuboidal or prism in shape. They have a rigid cell wall, and you guys please highlight this word cellulose. Okay, cellulose is a particular type of sugar, of carbohydrate, that plants use to make their cell walls. Later on in Biology 20, we'll talk about other organisms like, for example, fungi, and they do not use cellulose for their cell walls. They use something else called chitin. And then all plant cells also have chloroplasts, and chloroplasts are where photosynthesis takes place. So our bodies are made up of animal cells. Obviously, we're animals, right? And I think there's over 200 different kinds of cells in the human body. There are just muscle cells alone. There are 3 different types of muscle cells. There are bone cells, there are lung cells, there are epithelial cells that make up your skin. There's different layers there. There's all sorts of different types of blood cells, right? So they come in all shapes and sizes. And the very first slide I showed you today was that little critter right there. That's called a paramecium. And a paramecium is an animal cell. Okay, so it has organelles, and you can kind of see some of the organelles in there. Now, they're not animals. Okay, they belong to a different group of organisms, but their cells are eukaryotic. Okay, just like animal cells. Now here is a very characteristic plant cell. I don't actually know what type of plant this comes from. I can't tell. But what I can tell is that this is a plant cell. And the reason I can tell that is because they have cell walls, which are very, very rigid. And then these little green disc-like things, these are chloroplasts. Okay, and they're floating around in the cytoplasm. And their job is to absorb sunlight and convert that into sugar along with carbon dioxide and water. Okay, so you'll always know a plant cell by the chloroplasts and the cell wall. Now, I mentioned eukaryotic cells, which plant and animal cells are, have structures called organelles. Now, what is an organelle? An organelle literally means little organ. And these structures have various functions within the cell. I've listed a few here on this page, some common ones. I don't remember, or I don't know if you remember back to your junior high days, if you remember some of these. Obviously the mitochondria and the chloroplasts, those are kind of two that most people remember. The Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, the endoplasmic reticulum, the nucleus. So these are these, as well as a bunch more we're going to talk about today. So organelles, they are specialized structures which carry out various functions within the cell. So things like taking in nutrients, getting rid of waste products. Some cells move, so there's organelles associated with that. Growth, development, okay, exchanges of gases, reproduction, etc., etc. Okay, so we're going to go over a number of common organelles, and the ones that we go over, you are responsible for knowing for your quizzes and tests. So the cell membrane. Now we're going to spend a lot more time later on in section 2 talking about the cell membrane in detail. So right now, all I want you to know about the cell membrane is that it is made up of special molecules called phospholipids. Okay, and again, we will talk about phospholipids in great detail later on. Okay, the cell membrane forms a protective barrier for the cell, basically separates the cell from the outside world. Okay, it's a great barrier, and it allows certain things in and certain things out, but other things it does not allow in and out. Water is really hard. Water has a hard time passing through the cell membrane by itself, as well as things like ions. Now, attached to the cell membranes are lots of different proteins and glycoproteins that allow the cell to communicate and interact with other cells and to be recognized by other cells. Okay, so cell membrane forms the outside of the cell, the barrier. Now, I want everybody to please make note of this. The cell membrane is found in animal cells and plant cells. Now, some people think, no. The cell membrane is found in animal cells and the cell wall is found in plant cells. You're wrong, Forrest J. Well, no. The cell membrane is actually found in both, but in a plant cell, the cell wall is on the outside of the cell membrane. Okay, so a plant cell has both a cell wall and a cell membrane. The nucleus. The nucleus contains the DNA and genetic material of the cell. The nucleus is kind of the brain center and reproductive center of the cell. It regulates a cell's metabolism, which are all the chemical reactions that are occurring in the cell. It directs cell activities, and it is also surrounded by a membrane. Sometimes the membrane that surrounds the nucleus is called the nuclear envelope. Okay, so you can see in these plant cells here that the nucleus is stained. So a lot of times people will use stains in order to see the nucleus better, because the stuff that's in there, the DNA, it is made up of, the nucleus, the DNA is found in this substance called chromatin. And chromatin really picks up stains really well. So it's easy to differentiate the nucleus from the surrounding material. Now in Bio 30, we talk all about DNA. We talk about how the DNA forms chromosomes and how the chromosomes replicate, and we get into great detail about what goes on inside the nucleus. Now, the cytoplasm is just a blanket term for kind of everything found inside the cell membrane. The cytoplasm is a gel-like substance, and it gives the cell it gives the cell shape. It allows the organelles to be suspended in it. And many people think that the cytoplasm is just like Jello, right? You guys all know the dessert that you have that one aunt who brings to the picnics, right? It's that Jello mold, and it's got all the gross stuff kind of suspended in it. I don't know. I've never touched that stuff. It looks just. I had one aunt who put like hot dogs in it. I'm like, well, that's disgusting. But that's kind of what the I know. That's kind of what the cytoplasm is like. It's like a gel, and there's stuff suspended inside of it. But unlike a Jello, the cytoplasm actually moves around, and I've picked up a few animations to show this. It's known as cytoplasmic streaming. And the cytoplasm actually kind of moves, and it has currents inside of it. And this allows for things like nutrients and waste products and organelles to move around the cell. Now, this guy over here, this is an amoeba. And an amoeba moves around by using cytoplasmic streaming. So it directs the cytoplasm into these things called pseudopods, and it moves around kind of like a monster out of a science fiction movie. Okay, and that's known as cytoplasmic streaming. Lysosomes. Lysosomes are special sacs made of membrane. And usually inside the lysosome are strong chemicals that help to digest molecules. So you can almost think of the lysosomes as like the stomach of the cell. Now, there are many different cells in our body that use lysosomes for various roles. Sometimes cells move around your body looking for dead or dying cells. They ingest those cells and destroy them. Sometimes the cell itself will dump the contents of these lysosomes into an area to destroy invading cells. So we have these cells called white blood cells in our body that turn into various other types of cells, okay, and they help to protect our body. So lysosomes usually fuse with other particles and then digest those particles. Now, they're easily confused with something called vacuoles and vesicles. Vacuoles and vesicles are essentially the same thing, but generally we use the term vacuoles when we talk about plants. Okay, so vacuoles, we tend to talk about vacuoles when we talk about plants. And in plants, vacuoles, they contain mostly water. Now, plants and animals have vesicles, and vesicles are just basically little containers. And they can contain fats, they can contain proteins, they can contain all sorts of cellular materials. And these are used to transport materials around the cell and also in and out of the cell. Okay, so they're storage sites, and they also help to move materials around the cells. Whereas vacuoles are more, they're larger and they tend to store water, and this helps to give plant cells rigidity. And again, we'll talk more about these later when we talk about cellular transport. There's a whole section dedicated to cellular transport. Okay, so we will see these guys again later. The mitochondria, the good old mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. Why is it known as the powerhouse? You guys probably don't even know what a powerhouse is. Back in the old days, like for example, the University of Alberta. The University of Alberta is essentially like a little city in itself. And actually, the population of the University of Alberta, when I went there, 20 years ago, it would have been considered like the third or fourth largest city in all of Alberta. I think at the time there were like 30 or 35,000 students at the U of A when I went there. It's probably more now. But the University of Alberta had its own power plant. So it had a power plant that generated energy for the campus. So when we talk about a powerhouse, what we're talking about is literally cities, towns, large factories, campuses like U of A. They actually produce their own energy. And that's kind of where the mitochondria got its nickname. So what the mitochondria does is it takes sugar that we eat, it combines it with oxygen, and it produces waste. So carbon dioxide and water, these are waste products. But what we get out of it is energy, and this energy is called ATP. Okay, and that stands for adenosine triphosphate. And that ATP is like a battery for our cells. Everything our cells do, okay, your muscles, when they contract, uses ATP. Your nerve cells, when they can, transmit a nerve impulse, ATP. So anything the cell does requires ATP, and ATP comes from the burning of sugar in the mitochondria. Now in Bio 20, we spend about 2 weeks looking at these processes, okay, in great detail. But right now, I just need you to know that the mitochondria is where cellular respiration occurs. Okay, and this is cellular respiration. Endoplasmic reticulum. Here's a big fancy word. Endoplasmic just means inside the cytoplasm. Endo means in. So endoplasmic, in the cytoplasm, and reticulum means network. So big fancy science words. Sometimes scientists do that. I think they do that just to show off, I think. Look, we can use these big fancy words, really, but when we break these big fancy words down, they don't really, they're pretty simple. So endoplasmic, just inside the cytoplasm, and reticulum is a network. So it's a series of tubes that runs through the cytoplasm. So this would be like your road system through the cell. Okay, these are like roads. And they're set up through the cytoplasm to allow nutrients and waste products to move around the cell, just like a road. Okay, allows the transports of goods and materials. Now there's two types of endoplasmic reticulum, rough and smooth. Smooth endoplasmic reticulum is associated with lipid production. Anyone know another name for lipids? Fat, right. So fats, oils, okay? So our cells need to make these fats for all sorts of reasons. So lipid production is associated with the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and the rough endoplasmic reticulum, it looks rough under a microscope because it has these little dots on it, and these little dots are called ribosomes. Okay, these little dots are called ribosomes, and ribosomes are used to make proteins. Okay, so ribosomes are these little tiny units made up of a special substance called RNA. And ribosomes are responsible for reading the genetic code and making proteins. Okay, they're protein factories. Again, Bio 30, we spend an entire unit talking about protein synthesis. Okay, and the ribosome becomes very important in that whole process. Okay, so all you guys need to know though, ribosomes, they're found on the rough endoplasmic reticulum and they deal with protein synthesis. Golgi apparatus, named after Camillo Golgi. These look like stacks of pancakes in the cell, and they are another membranous organelle, so they're surrounded by a membrane. And what they do is they are involved in transporting substances, but not like the road network, not like the endoplasmic reticulum. What they do is they form vesicles. Okay, so substances are found inside the Golgi bodies or the Golgi apparatus, the same name, or different name, same thing. We have these substances that are found in there. These substances are packaged in these little bubbles, and these little bubbles are called vesicles. And then the vesicles can be transported around the cell, and then sometimes their contents are even dumped outside of the cell. Now, they are linked to the endoplasmic reticulum because sometimes substances that are formed in the endoplasmic reticulum can be transported via vesicles, and then they fuse to the Golgi bodies, and then they're processed some more inside the Golgi bodies, and then more vesicles are formed, and then they are dumped out of the cell. So again, Golgi bodies, Golgi apparatus. Okay, again, sometimes we hear the term Golgi bodies or Golgi apparatus, same thing. And they're involved in transport. The chloroplast. The chloroplast is found only in plant cells and in a special type of critter called a protist. Again, in Bio 20, I'll tell you more about protists. Okay, and the chloroplast is responsible for giving a plant its green color because it contains a green pigment called chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is found in the chloroplast. And the chloroplast is responsible for photosynthesis. This is the opposite of cellular respiration. Notice we have carbon dioxide. Okay, these are the reactants. And these are the products. So the plant uses carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight to make sugar, and then oxygen is the waste product. And the plant lets that out into the atmosphere, and then animal cells use that oxygen and that sugar to make energy, ATP. So this is basically the reverse reaction of cellular respiration. Do plant cells contain mitochondria? Another misconception out there, yes, plant cells have mitochondria. Do animal cells have chloroplasts? No. Okay, so plant cells have both. Animal cells only have mitochondria, no chloroplasts. Now, a cell wall is found in plants, bacteria, protists, and fungi, but in plants, the cell wall is made up of cellulose. And cellulose is a special type of sugar that's made by putting a bunch of glucose molecules together, tens of thousands of them, giving it a little twist. And then we have this big, humongous sugar, this carbohydrate called cellulose. Okay, and you can really see here, there's thick cell walls in these plant cells. Okay, this light white substance right here, that's the cell wall. Now, right below the cell wall, we would have the cell membrane. Okay, so some similarities and differences between plant and animal cells. Plant cells, do they have a cell membrane? Yes. Do animal cells have a membrane? Yes. Do plant cells have a cell wall made of cellulose? Yup. Do animal cells have a cell wall? No. Plant cells, they have chloroplasts? Yup. Animal cells? No. Mitochondria, plant cells? Yes. Animal cells? Yes. Vacuoles. Plant cells have a large vacuole that mostly holds water. Animal cells have small vacuoles, sometimes called vesicles, and they contain numerous substances. Okay, so definitely know the similarities and differences between plant and animal cells.